In this video, I want to introduce you to the typed XML document, and we're going to write a C# that manipulates an XML. So to make this more realistic, we're going to have to keep changing our schema here that came in this loans processor SDK. So what we're going to do is under the root, we're going to create, for instance, we need a repeating node to do what I want to show you. So I'm going to add a record called assets. And then under that, let's say I have a actual asset. And I'll have asset name and asset value. Of course, in the real world, you'd probably have liabilities as well, and job history, things like that. So asset value is going to be a decimal, money type field. And asset name will just be a string. Now to make sure this occurs multiple times, the group assets plural, we're going to put max occurs star, and min occurs doesn't have to occur at all, so let's put a 0 here. Okay, so now we're going to write a C# routine. I'm going to do that off the video and then I'll explain it to you. Okay, so this is our little code. It's going to be a public static and return an integer, a count of the number of assets we have. So the method name is getCountAssets, and we're going to pass it the entire XML document. And instead of using the XML document from system.xml, you have to use this special class called TypedXmlDocument. Okay, now as we continue, well, first of all, you see it's not found actually. It's missing namespace. So what we need to do is two things. We don't have the resolve here. So what we need to do is make a reference to that library. So over here in our references, we need to do right-click, add reference. I'll pause the video while that little screen pops up. Okay, so you're going to have to browse to the Microsoft library. So it's C Program Files, Microsoft BizTalk 2006. From here, let's do star.xlang.base.dll. Let's see what we get. Okay, that's the one you want right there. Microsoft.xlangs.basetypes.dll. So I'm going to put a little note right here in my comments. Make reference to that DLL. And now you can right click. I'm thinking maybe it's a different version. There's one you can say resolve here. That must be 2009. It'll actually build the using statement here for you. So we need to go to the top and we need to add here using Microsoft.ruleEngine. And let's just do a build and make sure that's going to work. Okay, there's one other reference we have to make. So we go back here, add reference. This time you can do it from the GAC, from .NET here. And scroll down and look for Microsoft BizTalk. Actually, no, Microsoft dot. Okay, it looks like it's not there, so we're going to go back here and look for Microsoft.rule. Okay, the trick here is that it's not in the BizTalk server library, it's in the common library. So here you go to Program Files, Common Files, then Microsoft BizTalk, and then Microsoft ruleengine.dll. And then click OK. And now let's do a build and make sure we're okay. So now our reference is okay. And we have some other issues down here. But first of all, is our XML type document okay? Yes. Now we have just problems with simpler types, XML node and XML node list. So this is where that resolve thing comes in. If it can find what using is needed for that. So you can right click and just click that, and then it will automatically add the using statement up here, system.xml. So now if we build that again, I think it should be clean or getting pretty close. Okay, this was something I borrowed some code, so now this is called asset nodes. and build again. And now we have a clean build. So let's look at the code, do a little walkthrough here. So we received some XML document, which is called a typed XML document. So the first thing you need to do is you can pull out either an XML document or a node, either one, out of the typed XML document. Okay, so when you refer to the document element or the document property of the typed document, that will return you a regular XML document or a node. And then here's your XPath. So let's look at our schema again. So over here, oops, we added a new XML field called assets. Now if you wanted to, you could use the full XPath here, which includes the local names and everything. But what I've done is I've kind of shortened it down to the shortest possible. So here I've used // and then local name equal assets, and I've left off the full namespaces. So this says basically find the XPath for assets. And then I'm going to say here return how many nodes there are, and then I'm just going to use the count of the number of nodes. So I'm going to say count is 0, and it's possible that my XPath could be bad or that there are no assets. So if that's the case, this will be null, and so it's always important to check for null anytime you call select nodes or select single node. Okay, so if it's null, we're going to say count node. If it's not null, we're going to say count nodes is equal to the count. If I try to reference the count and it's null, I would get an invalid reference exception. And then I return the number of nodes. So the number of nodes will either be 0 from this initialization, or it will be at the actual number of asset nodes that exist. Now this code here is totally specific to this specific schema because I've hard-coded the element name there. So what I'd like to do real quick here is just take this and we'll make a generic version of it. This is just up to you and how you want to design your code at your company. So here I could say get count of any node. And now I would have to pass another variable here, which would be a string, which would be node name. So here I should concatenate in that node name into the XPath. And so now instead of asset nodes, this would be, let's just call it selected nodes. So every time I have asset nodes here, let's just call it selected nodes. And now this should be able to work for any system you have, except you have to pass the extra parm when you call it. So we're going to do a rebuild on this. And it's done, and of course we have to copy it back to the GAC. So I'll go find the right files off the video. Okay, so these are the two directories I need again. I always kind of check the date here, the DLL, and make sure the date time is like within a few minutes ago. And then over here I have C Windows Assembly, which is the GAC, and I'm just going to copy that file down here. So you remember I've said this before, that anytime you do that, it will not see the new methods here until you close and reopen the entire BizTalk Microsoft Business Rule Composer. So we have to close it again, open it again, and now we're going to go back here. And it's possible you might have a rule here that says if the number of nodes is greater than 0, do this, else do this. So let's do a couple more things just to make this easier to test. I'm going to go back here and I'm going to add another element here called count number of assets from BRE. Now, of course, to test this, we're going to have to update our schema that we've been using. So here's our file called sample2.loan, and I'll open with Visual Studio. While I'm in Visual Studio, I want to go back to my schema and do one other little change. we're going to do two different ways of counting here. So I'm going to make two variables, one like this. First we're going to copy that, and we're going to go here and paste it. Then I'll rename that one and put a 2 on the end. And those should both be integers, actually. We should have strongly typed names when possible. I could have highlighted both of those, by the way, and changed them at once. That's the more efficient way to do it. Oops. I thought it would just jump down to the E's, not actually do that. Okay, hit int here. So now they're both integers, and we save that. So now in my editor here, I need assets. This is where, again, you might want to just do a generate instance of the file. That's not the file I want. So after the output file name, we have assets, and then between there we have asset name and asset value. And then after that we have, so we do sort of have this little IntelliSense here, which is kind of nice. Count number from BRE 1. Then we can copy that, put the 2 there. And let's say asset name here is primary residence, and that's 200,000. And let's say here we repeat this, and now we have a summer home. And let's make that 80,000. Okay, as I'm looking at this, there's one thing I really just don't like, and I'm kind of a perfectionist on some of these things. So here, I want to create another node called asset. Problem is it's not in my schema right now. Okay, and then let's go back to our schema. So really between here and here, I want to insert a child record called asset, and it's what I want to repeat. Okay, so assets plural should only occur one time, max. And then assets, if assets is there, well, it doesn't really matter. This can occur 0 and unbounded. So now, just back to cleaning this up. Okay, I don't know why it's not seeing, it's kind of trying to do IntelliSense, but it's not 100% accurate here, it looks like. Okay, so we have now assets plural, one time, and then under that I have my first asset singular and my second asset singular, my primary residence and my summer home. And then here we're going to fill in these two variables based upon two different rules that are going to call my two different methods that I've created. So we're going to have to make one more change to the C# here. One is here I want to actually count asset. So we're going to have to rebuild this and then GAC it again. So here we drag it back to the GAC. And now we're going to go use this rule. So here in this 1 = 1 rule, I'm going to go to my .NET class, browse, pick the BizTalk Training Common Library, and now under my BRE helpers, we should see here count assets. And so what I really want to do first is go to my schema here, and I can copy that from here. And now I want to set the value of count assets number 1. It automatically here puts equal value, right? So now I'm going to go to my .NET class and grab this get assets and pass it over here. And now we're going to pass it the typed XML document. Okay, and so I'm going to grab over here back to XML schema, and you actually grab the schema itself and you drop on this typed XML like that. Okay, and now we're going to do it again with the second BRE method. So in this case we have BRE2 count of assets. We're going to go back to our other .NET class called count any node. It still has a typed XML document, so we go back to the schema and grab the case XSD and put there. And then now we need to pass the node name, which is, you don't need single or double quotes here, by the way. It's just the word asset. So now we can save and test our rule. Let's make sure we saved our XML just to be sure. So here was our XML test file called XML sample2. And we'll go back here and now test policy. And then we'll add our sample2 file and test. So since we have the file loaded in Visual Studio, if we go back there, it should tell us the file changed on disk. Do we want to reload it into memory? And the answer is yes. And interestingly enough, we see two different answers here, huh? So one of our methods returned a 1, which is actually wrong, and the other one returned 2, which is correct. Isn't that interesting? So I know why. Okay. Mea culpa, my fault, as they say. Do you remember a while ago I changed this from assets plural to asset singular, and I didn't close the business rule composer because I thought I was a little lazy there. So what we're going to have to do is I regacked it, so we still have an old copy in memory. So I just have to reopen the business rule composer and go through the test one more time, which I'll do off the video. Okay, so I've added my file. I'm going to hit test again. Now I'm going to go back to Visual Studio. Forget which one it's in. It says it changed on the disk. Do I want to reload? Yes. And now I see both 2 and 2. So we are getting the number of nodes of how many assets this guy has. If you want to test with more assets, we could do like this. And if we just save that, it doesn't matter if they have the same name, Summer Home or not. If we go back and test again, we can change our data. We don't have to close the business rule composer. Only when we change the logic inside the C# code do we have to close and reopen this tool. And so we still have the same file. We click test. This is real time. Go back here. The file changed, yes, and now we see we have 4 assets. So there's 1, 2, 3, and 4. So in this video, what have we learned? Let's recap. We learned how to create a C# class that counts the number of nodes. And we did it 2 ways. We had a hard-coded XPath here, and we also had a more generic method here. Now, this assumes, by the way, that you don't have any other assets. Like, if this node occurred under 2 different children, then you would get the sum of all those. Well, I'm not sure what you'd get. You might get unpredictable results. So this does assume that there's only one node called asset in your XML. And we learned how to pass the typed XML document by copying the case.xsd onto our rule, or onto our facts, or what do you call it? Sorry, over here. When I was in this, the actions. So we built an action down here, and we copied the .NET class over here, and then we copied the name of the schema onto the typed XML document. And in this case, we had to pass a string as well. So we called the C#, we tested it, and we saw the results, and we got a count of our number of nodes. And so what you really learned in this lesson is how to pass an XML document to a C# code. And then within the C# code, you can basically use your XML manipulation, your XML documents, to manipulate it. You can either add new elements, you can count elements, you can run XPath, you could delete elements, you could do whatever you want. So coding the logic between here and here is, I guess, what I would call standard C# knowledge. I might delve into that a little bit on one of our future videos. One of our other videos, though, we'll learn how to add a new element. So that's one thing we will talk about. So that concludes this video.